Robert Miller woke up at 5:30 a.m. as usual. His alarm clock hadn't gone off yet. His internal clock was more accurate than any mechanism. After 23 years in the correctional system, his body had grown accustomed to a strict routine. He lay in bed for another minute, listening to the silence of his home on Maple Street. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Karen must have gotten up to go to the bathroom. Robert smiled. His 19-year-old daughter had inherited his habit of getting up early, even though her classes at Woodhaven Community College didn't start until 9. Better to be ready for the day than for the day to catch you off guard, he often told her. Those words had once been spoken to him by his own father, a police officer who had been killed in the line of duty when Robert was only 16. Getting out of bed, Robert went to the window. The March morning in Ohio greeted him with gray skies and a light fog that enveloped the factory smokestacks on the horizon. Woodhaven was a typical Midwestern industrial town, not rich but not poor either, a place where people worked their whole lives in the same place and knew each other for generations. Robert and his late wife Linda had grown up here. Karen had grown up here too. The county jail, which Robert had run for the past 8 years, was located on the outskirts of town. The 3-story brick building from the 1960s could hold up to 280 inmates, although it was rarely more than half full. Most were there for minor crimes, theft, fighting, drugs. Serious offenders were sent to the state prison in Columbus. Robert went down to the kitchen, where the smell of freshly brewed coffee was already in the air. Karen was standing at the stove, cooking eggs. She was short, like her mother, with the same light hair and gray eyes. But her personality was definitely her father's, stubborn and independent. "Good morning, Dad," she said without turning around. "I made you breakfast. I have a psychology test today." "Thanks, honey." Robert poured himself some coffee from the coffee maker, an old model that he and Linda had bought back in 1998. "How's school?" "Everything's great. Professor Anderson says I have a knack for counseling." Karen transferred the eggs to plates. "I'm thinking about specializing in family therapy." Robert nodded, though deep down he hoped his daughter would choose something more practical. In a town like Woodhaven, there were more family therapists than families in need of therapy. But he didn't argue. Since Linda's death from cancer 3 years ago, he and Karen had grown closer, and he had learned to value her opinion. "How are things with you?" Karen asked, sitting down across from him. "The usual. Not many new inmates. Johnson's getting out next week, served his time for burglary." Robert ate methodically, as always. "I'm afraid he'll be back in a couple of months. They usually are." Karen frowned. "Maybe they just need help? Support? Most people aren't born criminals." "Maybe," Robert agreed, although his experience told him otherwise. Over the years, he had seen enough repeat offenders to know that some people simply couldn't live in society. Karen glanced at her watch. "I have to go. See you tonight?" "Sure, I'll make dinner." She kissed him on the cheek and disappeared out the door. Robert was left alone with the morning silence and his thoughts. At 7:15, he was already in his office at the prison. The room was Spartan: a metal desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and a 10-year-old computer. His diplomas and a photo from his inauguration ceremony hung on the wall. The only personal item was a frame with a photo of Linda and Karen taken a year before his wife's death. Deputy Chief Dave Connor knocked on the door. Dave had worked here almost as long as Robert and was the only person he trusted completely. "Robert, we have a new guy. He arrived late last night. Mark Davis, 28 years old. Drugs, possession and distribution of heroin, 18 months. Robert took the file. "Local?" "No, from Toledo. But he has connections here. And another thing." Dave paused. "He's HIV positive. His medical records are in order, but we'll have to keep an eye on him." "Understood. Where's he been placed?" "A single cell in Block C, doctor. Paris has already examined him. She says he's stable, but he needs regular medication." Robert nodded. HIV-positive inmates required special attention, not only medical, but also administrative. The other inmates weren't always tolerant of them. I'll talk to him later. What else? Johnson is requesting a meeting. He says he wants to discuss his plans after his release. Schedule it for tomorrow morning. The day passed in routine tasks. Robert made his rounds of the cells, talked to the inmates, and dealt with administrative issues. He knew almost everyone by name, knew their stories, their families. Some respected him, others feared him. But everyone understood that he was fair and predictable. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he went down to Block C. Cell 47 was at the end of the corridor, slightly off to the side from the others. Mark Davis was sitting on his bunk, reading a worn paperback. He was thin, with dark hair and sunken cheeks, the typical portrait of a drug addict. But there was something else in his eyes, an intelligence often found in people who had gotten into trouble not because of stupidity, but because of bad decisions. "Davis," Robert called out to him. Mark looked up. "Yes, sir? How are you doing?" "How did they treat you?" "Fine. Quiet so far." Mark put down his book. "Are you Chief Miller?" "Yes. I wanted to talk to you. Are you settling in okay?" "Yes, sir. I don't want any trouble. I just want to serve my time and get out." Robert studied his face. Over the years, he had learned to read people, and Davis seemed sincere. "Good. You have special medical needs. Dr. Collins will be monitoring your condition. If you have any problems with the other inmates..." "I understand, sir. I'll be careful. See you around, Davis." Robert returned to his office with a good impression of the new inmate. Some people ended up in prison because of bad circumstances, not bad character. Perhaps Davis was one of those cases. That evening at home, Karen was preparing dinner. She was unusually lively, humming to herself as she made the salad. "How did your test go?" Robert asked. "Great. I think I'll get an A." Karen smiled. "And I met a guy from a parallel group, Mike. He's studying social work." Robert tensed up. Karen had dated a few guys over the past few years, but none of them were serious. "Tell me about him." "He's great, smart, kind. He wants to work with troubled teenagers." Karen avoided looking her father in the eye. "Maybe you can introduce him to him sometime?" "We'll see," Robert replied cautiously. He didn't want to seem too nosy, but his father's instincts told him that his daughter was hiding something. At dinner, they talked about work, school, and plans for the weekend. Karen was unusually talkative, which was unusual for her. Robert noticed that she was checking her phone frequently, and it bothered him. "Karen, are you okay? You seem upset." "Everything's fine, Dad. Just a good day." She got up to clear the plates. "I'm going to my room to get ready for class tomorrow." Robert remained alone in the kitchen, sensing that something had changed. Karen was growing up, and that was natural. But his intuition told him that something more was going on. He couldn't have imagined how much his life would change in the coming weeks. 2 weeks had passed since Mark Davis had arrived at the prison. Robert had been watching him from a distance and had to admit that his first impression had been correct. Davis kept to himself, avoided conflict, and spent most of his time in the library or reading in his cell. The other inmates were wary of him, partly because of his HIV status and partly because he was an outsider. On Thursday morning, Dr. Paris Collins came to Robert's office with the weekly medical report. Paris had been the chief medical officer at the city hospital for 15 years and served as the prison's doctor on a part-time basis. She was a competent professional, though she sometimes seemed too focused on her patients and not attentive enough to the security of the facility. "Davis is taking his medication regularly," she reported, sitting down across from Robert's desk. "His viral load is under control. Physically, he's in relatively good shape considering his history." "Any problems with other inmates?" "Not yet, although I've heard some talk. Some don't understand that HIV isn't airborne." Paris adjusted her glasses. "Maybe we should have an educational talk?" Robert thought about it. "I don't want to draw unnecessary attention to his diagnosis. That could only make things worse. I understand your position, but ignorance breeds fear, and fear breeds violence. I'll think about it." Robert made a note in his notebook. What else? Johnson is complaining of back pain. An X-ray showed an old spinal injury. Nothing serious, but he needs painkillers. What kind? Ibuprofen is working for now, but if the pain gets worse, he may need something stronger. Robert nodded. Painkillers were a sensitive issue in prison. Too many inmates had drug problems, and prescription drugs could cause new problems. After Dr. Collins left, Robert went down to Block C. He wanted to talk to Davis in person to make sure he felt safe. Mark was sitting in the library studying a textbook. Davis, can we talk? Mark looked up. He had gained some weight in the last 2 weeks, and his face looked less haggard. Sure, sir. They went into an empty meeting room for lawyers. Robert sat down across from Mark, studying his face. How are you doing? Honestly. I'm fine, sir. I'm trying not to draw attention to myself. That's wise. But if you have any problems, you must tell me. Understood? Yes, sir. Mark paused, then added, Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Do you always care so much about the inmates? Robert was surprised by the directness of the question. I care about order in my institution. That includes the well-being of everyone here. I see. Mark nodded. I just wasn't expecting that kind of attitude. It was different in Toledo. What are you studying? Robert nodded at the textbook in Mark's hands. Sociology. I didn't finish college when everything went wrong. I think maybe it's not too late. It's never too late, Robert agreed. What happened, if you don't mind me asking? Mark was silent for a long time. I got hooked on drugs when I was 22. Heroin. At first, I thought I had it under control. Then everything fell apart very quickly. I lost my job, my girlfriend, my apartment. I started dealing to feed my habit. What about HIV? A dirty needle 3 years ago. I found out by accident when I ended up in the hospital with an overdose. Mark stared at the floor. Strange, but the diagnosis made me think, you know? Suddenly life became finite, real. Robert nodded. He had heard stories like this before. Sometimes it was the proximity of death that made people appreciate life. Have you quit drugs? Yes, sir. I've been clean for 2 years. Therapy, support groups, medication. I got arrested because of old debts. I tried to pay it off by selling what I had left. I see. Robert stood up. Good luck with your studies, Davis. That evening at home, Robert noticed that Karen was unusually animated again. She was singing as she cooked dinner and smiled often to herself. How are things with Mike? He asked, trying to make the question sound casual. Great, Karen blushed. We talk a lot. We have a lot in common. Like what? Working with people, helping those in need. He really wants to make the world a better place. Robert felt a pang of anxiety. Youthful idealism was beautiful, but he had seen too many naive people get hurt trying to save those who didn't want to be saved. Where do you guys hang out? Mostly at college. Sometimes we go to a cafe. Karen avoided looking at him. Dad, I want to invite him over for dinner next week. Is that okay? Of course. I'd like to meet him. After dinner, Karen said she was going to a friend's house to study for an exam and left. Robert was left alone, feeling increasingly uneasy. Something about his daughter's behavior alarmed him, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Around 11 o'clock, Karen came home. Robert was reading in the living room and noticed that she looked upset. How's your studying going? Fine. Karen kissed him on the cheek. Good night, Dad. The next day, there was a minor incident at the prison. 2 inmates got into a fight in the cafeteria over a place in line. It was nothing serious, but Robert noticed that one of the participants, Tommy Rivers, who was in for burglary, was talking loudly after the fight about the contagion in their block. Dave Connor approached Robert after the incident had been dealt with. Rivers was referring to Davis, he said quietly. Rumors are spreading. Some inmates are demanding that he be transferred to another block. On what grounds? They say they're afraid of being infected. Robert sighed. This was exactly what he had feared. Gather them tomorrow morning. We'll have a talk. The next morning, Robert gathered the inmates of Block C in the recreation room. 23 men sat in a semicircle, some looking hostile. I know there are rumors going around, Robert began. I want to set the record straight. HIV is not transmitted through the air, through handshakes, or through shared utensils. That is a medical fact. Tommy Rivers raised his hand. What if he cuts himself? Is the blood contagious? Blood can indeed be contagious, but we take every precaution. And remember, discrimination on medical grounds is strictly prohibited. The discussion lasted half an hour. Robert answered all the questions and dispelled the main myths. Most of the inmates seemed reassured, although some still appeared skeptical. After the meeting, Mark Davis approached Robert. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You didn't have to do that. I had to. Ignorance is dangerous. Anyway, thank you." Mark paused. "Can I ask you one more question? A personal one?" Robert nodded. "Do you have any children?" "A daughter, Karen. She's 19. Is she in school?" "At a local college, studying psychology." Mark smiled. "So she wants to help people, like her father, like her daughter." "Maybe." Robert was surprised that Mark saw a connection between his job and the desire to help people. Most inmates viewed the prison administration as nothing more than a punitive force. That evening, Karen said she wasn't feeling well. She had a headache and went to bed early. Robert brought her some aspirin and tea, noticing that his daughter looked pale. "Maybe you should skip class tomorrow?" "No, I'm fine. I'm just tired." But the next day, Karen looked even worse. She barely touched her breakfast, and Robert insisted that she see a doctor. "It's just a cold, Dad." "Nevertheless, go see Dr. Collins, for my peace of mind." Karen reluctantly agreed. Robert walked her to the car, feeling a growing sense of unease. Something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. The day in prison passed quietly. Robert noticed that the atmosphere in Block C had improved noticeably since yesterday's conversation. Mark Davis was even playing chess with another inmate in the recreation room. Around 4 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Karen. "Dad, I'm at Dr. Collins' office. She wants to run some more tests." "Is it serious?" "I don't know. She says it's just a precaution, but..." Karen paused. "Can you come over?" Robert felt his heart sink with fear. "Of course, I'm on my way." He reached the hospital in 10 minutes. Karen was sitting in the waiting room, looking worried and small. Dr. Collins came out a few minutes later. "Robert, can we talk in private?" They went into her office. Paris looked concerned. "Karen is complaining of fatigue, headaches, and a slight fever. The symptoms are nonspecific, but I want to rule out some possibilities. I've taken blood for a complete workup." "What do you suspect?" "Nothing specific yet. Possibly a viral infection. The results will be back tomorrow morning." Robert nodded, but he couldn't shake his uneasiness. Over the years he had lived with Linda, he had learned to recognize when doctors were hiding something. When he got home that evening, Karen went to bed early. Robert sat in the living room trying to read, but his thoughts kept returning to his daughter. She had been his whole life since Linda died. The thought that something might happen to her was unbearable. Around 11 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Paris Collins. "Robert, I'm sorry to call so late. Some of the test results came in early. We need to talk. Tomorrow morning." "Perry, what's going on?" A long silence. "Tomorrow morning, Robert. Come with Karen at 9. Robert hung up, feeling that his world was about to change forever. Robert didn't sleep all night. He lay in bed, listening to every sound in the house, checking on Karen every half hour. She slept restlessly, moaning in her sleep from time to time. By morning, his head ached from tension and lack of sleep. At 8 in the morning, Karen came down to the kitchen looking even worse than the day before. Her face was pale, with dark circles under her eyes. "How are you feeling?" Robert asked, pouring her some orange juice. "Not great. My head is splitting. Karen sat down at the table, struggling to keep her eyes open. Dad, what if it's something serious? Don't think about that yet. Dr. Collins is an excellent specialist. We'll figure it out. But inside, Robert was panicking. He had lost Linda to cancer, and the thought of losing Karen too was unbearable. At the hospital, a nurse greeted them and showed them into Dr. Collins's office. Paris looked tired and worried. A folder with the test results was lying on the table. "Please sit down," she said, gesturing to the chairs across from the desk. Robert felt his heart beat faster. Paris's tone did not bode well. "Karen, how are you feeling this morning?" "Bad. I have a headache and feel a little nauseous." Paris nodded as she opened the folder. "Some of the test results are concerning. I need to ask you a few personal questions." Karen looked at her father, then back at the doctor. "What kind of questions?" "Are you sexually active?" Karen blushed. "Does my father have to be here?" "Karen, it's important for the diagnosis," Paris said gently. "Robert, perhaps you'd like to wait outside." Robert wanted to stay, but nodded and went out into the hallway. Through the glass door, he could see Paris and Karen talking, but he couldn't hear what they were saying. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes. When the door opened, Karen's face was wet with tears. "Robert, come in," Paris called. He sat down next to his daughter and took her hand. She was trembling. "What's going on?" Paris was silent for a long time, studying the documents. "Robert, the results show that Karen is HIV positive." The words hit him like a bolt of lightning. Robert felt the world around him freeze. "What? That's impossible." "I understand that this is a shock, but the tests are clear. The rapid test is positive, and the confirmatory test is also positive." Karen cried, covering her face with her hands. Robert hugged her, feeling his own eyes fill with tears. "How did this happen?" he asked hoarsely. Paris looked at Karen. "That's a question for your daughter." Robert turned to Karen. "Honey, please explain this to me." Karen looked up with tear-filled eyes. "Dad, I've been seeing someone. Not Mike, someone else." "Who?" "His name is Mark. We met a month ago. He didn't tell me about his status." Robert felt the blood drain from his veins. "Mark? What's his last name?" "Davis." "Oh my God." Karen looked at her father in horror. "He's the one you have in prison?" Robert couldn't speak. Fragments of his conversation with Davis were spinning in his head. His questions about his daughter, his mention of having connections in town. "Robert?" Paris put her hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" He knew. He knew who she was. Robert's voice trembled with rage and pain. "He did this on purpose." "Dad, no, he didn't know I was your daughter. I gave him a different name." Karen grabbed his arm. "Please believe me." "What name?" "Karen Johnson. I didn't want anyone to know who my father was. Some students at college treat the children of police officers differently." Robert tried to process the information. Maybe Karen was telling the truth. Maybe it was a terrible accident. "Where did you meet?" Paris asked. "In the park. Sometimes at his apartment." Karen wiped away her tears. He seemed so lonely, lost. He said he had problems, but he wouldn't explain what they were. "When did this start?" "About a month ago. We had been seeing each other a few times before he was arrested." Robert remembered the date Davis had been admitted to prison. 2 weeks ago. That meant they had been seeing each other for 2 weeks before his arrest. "Karen, this is extremely important," Paris said. "Did you have unprotected sex?" Karen nodded without looking up. "Yes. He said he didn't have any diseases. I believed him." Robert felt a rush of rage so strong that his head spun. Davis knew about his diagnosis. He knew and kept quiet. He infected his girl. "What now?" he asked, trying to control his voice. "Karen needs to start antiretroviral therapy immediately," Paris explained. The sooner we start treatment, the better the prognosis. With modern drugs, HIV can be controlled. So she'll live? With the right treatment, people with HIV live almost normal lives. But that means lifelong therapy, regular checkups, and precautions. Robert hugged Karen tighter. Everything will be okay, honey. We'll get through this. The next hour was spent discussing treatment, tests, and precautions. Paris wrote out prescriptions, scheduled follow-up appointments, and gave them the phone numbers of support groups. Robert mechanically wrote down the information, but his mind was elsewhere. Mark Davis had infected his daughter. Whether he did it on purpose or not didn't matter. The result was the same. Karen's life had changed forever. At home, Karen went to bed, exhausted from emotional stress. Robert sat in the kitchen, staring into space. The same thoughts kept running through his head. How did this happen? Why hadn't he protected his daughter? What would he tell Davis? Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Dave Connor called. "Robert, where are you? We have a little problem with Davis." "What kind of problem?" "He's asking for a meeting. He says he has something to tell you. He sounds upset." Robert felt his stomach tighten. "I'll be there in half an hour." "Robert, are you okay? You sound strange." "Everything's fine. See you soon." Robert drove to the prison, feeling anger battling with his professional duty. He was the head of the institution, bound to uphold law and order, but he was also a father whose daughter had been hurt by one of his inmates. At the prison, Dave met him at the entrance. "Davis has been nervous all day. He asked me to tell you that it's about his personal life before he was arrested." Robert nodded, not trusting his voice. They walked into the attorney meeting room. Mark Davis sat at the table looking nervous and guilty. "Mr. Miller, thank you for coming. I need to tell you something." Robert sat down opposite him, studying Davis's face. "I'm listening." "It's about a girl, Karen. I only found out her last name yesterday when one of the inmates mentioned that you have a daughter named Karen who's in college." "Go on." "We were dating before I was arrested. She called herself Karen Johnson, so I didn't know." Mark fell silent, staring at the table. "Mr. Miller, I didn't tell her about my diagnosis. I know I should have, but what?" Robert's voice was icy. "I fell in love with her. For the first time in years, someone saw me as a person, not a drug addict or a sick man. I was afraid of losing her." Robert felt anger rising in his throat. "And that's why you decided to put her at risk?" "I thought I hoped we'd have time, that I'd find a way to tell her. We'd only been seeing each other a few times, and I'm on medication. My viral load is low." "That's no excuse!" Robert exploded. "You had to tell her!" Mark looked up, and Robert saw genuine remorse in his eyes. "I know. God, I know. I think about it every day. Did she get tested?" Robert was silent, fighting the urge to lean across the table and grab Davis by the throat. "Mr. Miller, please tell me. Did she get infected?" "Yes." Mark covered his face with his hands and began to cry. Oh God, what have I done?" Robert looked at the sobbing man and felt hatred mingling with disgust. "You've ruined the life of a 19-year-old girl. I know, I'll do anything. Help with the treatment, testify, anything. There's nothing you can do. Nothing." Robert stood up and headed for the door, but Davis's voice stopped him. "Mr. Miller, I understand that you hate me, but believe me, no one hates me more than I do." Robert turned around. "You're wrong, Davis. You're very wrong." At home that evening, Robert sat next to Karen's bed. His daughter was asleep, under the influence of a sedative prescribed by Dr. Collins. Her face was peaceful, almost childlike. It was hard to believe that her life had changed forever. Robert thought about his conversation with Davis. The man seemed genuinely remorseful, but that didn't change anything. Karen was infected. She would have to live with an incurable disease because of one man's selfishness and cowardice. Around midnight, Karen woke up. "Dad? Are you here?" "Yes, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Physically better. The medicine helped." She sat up in bed. "Emotionally, I don't know. It's so unreal. We'll get through this, together. Karen took his hand. Dad, it's not your fault. It's not mine either. We couldn't have known. But he knew. He knew, and he didn't tell us. I was so stupid. I should have been more careful. No, Robert said sharply. You didn't have to be careful. He should have been honest. It's his fault and his alone. Karen began to cry. What will happen now? Who will want to be with me knowing about the diagnosis? Will I be able to have children, a normal family? Robert hugged his daughter, feeling his own heart break with pain. You'll have everything you want. Modern medicine can work wonders. Dr. Collins said that with the right treatment. But it won't be the same, will it? I'll never be the same again. Robert couldn't answer because she was right. Karen would never be the same again. And the man who was now sleeping in a cell a few miles from their home was to blame. Robert didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He lay in bed thinking about Mark Davis, about how he had talked about his remorse, about his desire to help. Words, just words. They couldn't change what had happened. By morning, a single thought had formed in Robert's mind, so clear and cold that it frightened him. Mark Davis had destroyed his daughter's life, and he would pay for it. Robert woke up at 4:30 in the morning feeling as if he hadn't slept at all. Thoughts of Karen and Mark Davis had been running through his head all night, giving him no peace. He got up and quietly went down to the kitchen, trying not to wake his daughter. He made coffee and sat by the window, watching the city slowly wake up. Outside, it was a typical March day in Woodhaven. People were going to work, children were rushing to school. Life went on as if nothing had changed. But for Robert, his world had been turned upside down. His little girl was sick, and the man he had put in prison was to blame. Karen came downstairs around 7, looking tired but more composed than the night before. Good morning, Dad. How did you sleep? Fine, Robert lied. How are you? Better. The medicine is helping. She poured herself some orange juice. I've been thinking all night. I want to go back to class. I can't just sit at home thinking about this. Are you sure? Maybe you should take a few days off. No, Dad. If I start hiding now, I'll never stop. Karen sat down across from him. Dr. Collins said, I'm not contagious while I'm on medication. Life has to go on. Robert was proud of his daughter's courage, but at the same time, he felt a cold determination growing inside him. Karen was trying to return to normal life, but she would never be the same. And the person responsible for that was sitting in a cell, thinking that his remorse would change something. I'll drive you to college, Robert said. No, I have my car. I want to drive you. Karen looked at him intently. Dad, are you okay? You look strange. I'm just worried about you. They were silent on the way to college. Robert caught himself several times clenching the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. When he dropped Karen off at the main entrance, she turned around. Dad, promise me something. What? Don't do anything stupid. I know you're angry with Mark, but just don't do anything you'll regret. Robert kissed her on the cheek. See you tonight. In prison, the morning began with the usual checks. Robert walked around the blocks, talked to the guards, checked the reports. But his thoughts kept returning to cell 47 in Block C, where Mark Davis was sitting. Around 10 o'clock, Dave Connor walked into his office. Robert, we have a problem. Davis is refusing breakfast, saying he doesn't feel well. Should we call Dr. Collins? I'll talk to him, Robert said, getting up from his desk. Do you want me to go with you? No, I'll handle it. Robert went down to Block C. The corridor was empty. The inmates were either at work or in the recreation area. He stopped at cell 47 and looked through the bars. Mark Davis was lying on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Davis, how are you? Mark turned his head. His eyes were red, his face gaunt. Mr. Miller, I wasn't expecting to see you. I hear you're refusing food. I'm not hungry. Mark sat up on his bunk. How's your daughter? Robert felt the familiar rush of anger. She started taking her medication. Good. That's good. Mark rubbed his face with his hands. Mr. Miller, I know my apology means nothing, but you're right. It means nothing. Mark nodded. I thought about it all night, about what I did, about what kind of monster I am. And what did you come to? That I don't belong among people, that I deserve everything that's happening to me. Robert studied the prisoner's face. Mark really did look like a broken man, but that didn't change anything. Davis, I want to show you something. Come with me. Mark looked at him in surprise. Where? To the basement. I want to show you the old part of the building. Robert opened the cell door. Mark stepped uncertainly into the corridor. Prisoners were not usually allowed out of their cells unaccompanied, but Robert was the warden. His word was law. They walked through a service corridor to the stairs leading down to the basement. The old part of the building was used as a storage area and was rarely visited. It was damp and dark down there, and it smelled of mold and old concrete. Mr. Miller, why are we here? Mark asked when they stopped in the far corner of the basement among the old shelves. Robert turned to him. In the dim light, the prison warden's face looked like a mask. I want to talk to you without witnesses. About what? About justice. Mark took a step back, sensing something sinister in Robert's tone. Mr. Miller, I don't understand. My daughter was 19, Davis. She had her whole life ahead of her. She wanted to be a family psychologist, to help people. She wanted to get married, have children. She still can. No! Robert exploded. She can't! You took her future away from her. You've made her sick for life. Mark raised his hands in a defensive gesture. Mr. Miller, please. I understand your anger, but you don't understand anything. You think your tears and remorse will change anything? You think you can just say, I'm sorry, and everything will be fine? Robert took a step forward. Mark backed away and bumped into a bookcase. Mr. Miller, what are you doing? Robert pulled a heavy wrench from his pocket, part of the old equipment he had picked up on his way to the basement. I'm doing what I should have done yesterday. Mark's eyes widened in horror. No, wait, you can't. I can, and I will. Mark tried to run away, but Robert was stronger and faster. The first blow landed on his head. Mark fell, blood running down his face. Please, he croaked. I have a mother and a sister. And my daughter has a father, Robert said, and struck him again. Mark stopped moving. Robert stood over the body, breathing heavily. His rage slowly receded, giving way to cold calculation. He wiped the wrench on Mark's clothes and placed it next to the body so that it looked like it had fallen from the shelf. Then he moved several heavy boxes to make it look like the shelf had collapsed. Mark could have climbed up here himself, tried to get something from the top shelf, and the shelf could have fallen. Robert went upstairs and calmly walked into his office. He sat down at his desk and went about his usual business as if nothing had happened. Half an hour later, security guard Tommy Rice knocked on the door. Mr. Miller, we can't find inmate Davis. He didn't come back after breakfast. Look for him. Check all the rooms. We're already checking. Maybe we should sound the alarm? Wait another half hour. If you don't find him, sound the alarm. Robert knew they would find the body. The only question was whether they would believe it was an accident. Mark was found an hour later. Robert went down to the basement with the guards and Dr. Collins, pretending to be shocked and concerned. What happened here? Dave Connor asked, examining the scene. Looks like an accident, Dr. Collins said, examining the body. Blunt head trauma. This bookcase could have fallen on him. But what was he doing here? Dave wondered. Maybe he was trying to get something, Robert suggested. Prisoners sometimes look for places to be alone. Dr. Collins examined the wound carefully. Yes, it's consistent with a heavy object falling on him. Death was rapid. An hour later, the police arrived. Detective James Thompson was an experienced investigator who had been working in the county for 15 years. Robert knew him from several cases they had worked on together and considered him a competent professional. "Robert, tell me what happened," Thompson said, examining the scene. "Davis wasn't at roll call after breakfast. We searched the entire building. We found him here." "Who was the last person to see him?" "I spoke to him in his cell this morning. He wasn't feeling well and refused to eat." "Depression?" "Possibly. He had personal problems." Thompson nodded, jotting down notes in his notebook. "Who else had access to the basement?" "Technically, all staff, but they rarely come down here, mainly to check communications or for old documents." "Surveillance cameras?" "None here, only on the main floors." Thompson examined the bookcase and studied the surrounding objects. "Looks like an accident. These old shelves are unstable, and if he was trying to reach something..." "Yes, possibly," Robert agreed. When Robert returned home that evening, he found Karen in the kitchen. She was preparing dinner and seemed more cheerful than she had been that morning. "Hi, Dad. How was work?" Robert froze for a moment. "The usual. How was your day?" "Fine. I told my friend Susan about the diagnosis. She was very supportive. She said it doesn't change our relationship." "That's good." Karen turned to him. "Dad, you look tired. Is everything okay?" "Yes, just a hard day." They ate dinner in relative silence. Karen talked about her classes and how the other students were reacting to her return. Robert listened, nodded, answered questions, but his mind was far away. He had killed a man for the first time in his life. And strangely, he felt no remorse, only relief. Mark Davis would never hurt anyone again. Around 9 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Dave Connor. "Robert, bad news. Inmate Davis died this afternoon. An accident in the basement." Robert paused, feigning shock. "What? How did it happen?" "A shelf fell. The police are treating it as an accident. But you should know that there will be an official investigation tomorrow morning." "I see. Thanks for letting me know." Robert hung up and turned to Karen. His daughter was looking at him curiously. "What's wrong?" Robert paused, choosing his words carefully. "Karen, that man, Mark Davis, he died in prison today." Karen's face turned pale. "What? How?" "An accident. A shelf fell in the basement." Karen sat down, covering her face with her hands. Robert didn't know what she was feeling. Relief, grief, guilt. "Karen? I don't know what to feel," she said quietly. "He ruined my life, but he was also a human being." "Yes, he was," Robert agreed, hugging his daughter. "Do you think he suffered?" Robert remembered the last moments of Mark's life, his pleas for mercy. "No, dear, I think it was quick." Karen cried, not out of grief, but out of relief mixed with guilt. "It's terrible that I feel relieved. What does that say about me?" "It says you're human, and that's okay." That night, lying in bed, Robert thought about what had happened. He had crossed a line he never thought he would cross. He had become a murderer. But for Karen, he was willing to cross any line. Mark Davis got what he deserved. Now he just had to make sure the investigation didn't uncover the truth. Robert woke up early, as usual. But this morning, everything seemed different. The sunlight streaming through the curtains, the familiar sounds of the city waking up. It all took on new meaning. He was a murderer. The words spun around in his head with frightening clarity. But strangely, it didn't cause him any remorse. Karen came down to the kitchen later than usual, looking tired and pensive. "Did you sleep badly?" Robert asked, pouring her some orange juice. "I was thinking about what you said yesterday, about Mark." She sat down at the table without touching her breakfast. "It's strange, Dad. I was angry with him. I even hated him. But now that he's gone, I feel guilty." "You're not responsible for his death, Karen." "I know, but I'm glad he's dead. Does that make me a bad person?" Robert hugged his daughter. "No, dear. It makes you a person with normal feelings." In prison, the day began with an official investigation. Detective Thompson arrived at 9 in the morning with his assistant and a forensic technician. Robert met them in his office, trying to look normal. "James, how's the investigation going?" "So far, everything points to an accident," Thompson said, opening his notebook. "But I need to ask you a few questions for the record." "Of course." "Tell me again about your last conversation with Davis." Robert repeated the version he had prepared all night. "I went to see him around 10 in the morning. He looked depressed and refused to eat. He complained of feeling unwell." "What did you talk about?" "About his condition. I offered to call a doctor, but he refused. He said he just wanted to be alone." "Did he mention wanting to go to the basement?" "No. But prisoners sometimes look for secluded places. It's normal." Thompson wrote down the answer. "Who else saw Davis yesterday morning?" "Guard Rice saw him in his cell around 9. Cook Jones said Davis didn't show up for breakfast." "And access to the basement? Was the door locked?" Robert felt a slight tension. This was an important question. "It's usually locked, but all senior staff have keys. Sometimes inmates find ways to get in." "Could Davis have gotten a key?" "Theoretically, yes. If he stole one or found a lost one." Thompson nodded. "Can you show me the scene again?" They went down to the basement. The technician photographed everything from different angles and collected samples. Robert watched, trying to look interested, but not too much. "Strange," Thompson said, examining the fallen rack. "These metal structures are quite sturdy, but they're old. The fastenings could have weakened over time." "Possibly." Thompson crouched down next to the bloodstain on the floor. "The technician says the blow was strong, a skull fracture. These shelves are heavy and tall." "Yes, that explains the injuries." Thompson stood up and walked around the scene. "Robert, did Davis have any enemies among the inmates?" The question was unexpected. "Why do you ask?" "Just checking all possibilities. HIV status could have caused conflicts. There was some friction at first, but I had a talk with them, and the situation improved." "Who exactly expressed dissatisfaction?" Robert named several names, including Tommy Rivers. But they were all at work when the incident occurred. They have alibis. The investigation continued until lunchtime. Thompson interviewed staff and inmates and studied surveillance camera footage. Robert monitored the process, answered questions, and provided documents. After lunch, the detective went into Robert's office. "So far, everything fits with the accident theory," he said, closing his notebook. "The technician found no signs of a struggle. The injuries are consistent with a fall from a heavy object." "Good," Robert said. "So we can close the case?" "Not so fast. There are a few things that bother me." Robert felt a pang of anxiety. "What are they?" "Davis was HIV positive and a drug addict, but he was in good physical shape. What could have made him climb a tall shelf?" "Maybe he was looking for drugs. Inmates sometimes hide contraband in the most unexpected places." "Maybe." Thompson paused. "I'm also surprised that no one heard the rack fall. It must have made a lot of noise." Robert shrugged. "The basement is isolated, and the staff were busy on other floors." "Possibly." Thompson stood up. "I'll talk to a couple of inmates tomorrow, but for now, it's officially an accident." After the police left, Robert felt some relief, but he knew the danger was not over yet. Thompson was an experienced detective, and his doubts could lead to a more detailed investigation. That evening at home, Karen greeted him with the question, "How did the investigation go?" "The police are treating it as an accident." "And you agree?" Robert looked at his daughter intently. "What do you think?" "I don't know. It's just strange that he died right now when we found out what he did." "Life is full of coincidences, Karen." The next day, Thompson returned as promised. He interviewed several more inmates, studied Davis's personal file, and reviewed his medical records. "Interesting," he said to Robert after lunch. "Dr. Collins mentioned that Davis seemed depressed yesterday, but his health indicators were stable." Depression isn't always related to physical condition. True. Thompson leafed through the records. Did he have any personal problems, family, girlfriend? Robert felt his heart beat faster. I don't know the details. He rarely talked about his personal life. I see. Thompson closed the folder. Robert, can I ask you a personal question? I'm listening. How did you feel about Davis? As a prisoner? The question caught Robert off guard. Normally, like everyone else. No particular feelings? Pity? Dislike? No. Why do you ask? Several inmates mentioned that you paid special attention to him. You talked to him more than you talked to the others. Robert felt a chill of fear. He was new, HIV positive. He required extra supervision. I see. Thompson studied Robert's face closely. And your daughter? How's she doing in school? The change of subject was unexpected. Fine. Why? Just curious. She's studying psychology, right? Yes. At the local college. She probably knows a lot of young people. Robert realized where the detective was going with this and felt a chill. James, what are you getting at? Nothing in particular. Just general questions. Thompson stood up. Thanks for your cooperation, Robert. I'll be in touch if I have any further questions. After Thompson left, Robert realized that the detective suspected something. Perhaps someone had seen him with Davis in the basement, or there were witnesses to their conversation that morning. That evening at home, Karen noticed that he was nervous. Dad, you've been anxious all day. What's wrong? Nothing, just work. Is it because of the investigation into Mark's death? Robert nodded. The detective is asking a lot of questions. What could he find? It was an accident. Of course, but the police have to be sure. The next morning, Robert arrived at the prison and found Thompson waiting for him in his office. Good morning, Robert. We need to talk. The detective's tone made it clear that something serious had happened. I'm listening. Last night I received some interesting information. It turns out that Davis had a girlfriend here in town, Karen Johnson. Robert felt the ground slip away beneath his feet. And? It's interesting that your daughter is also named Karen, and she's studying psychology at the local college, just like Davis's girlfriend. Coincidence? Possibly. Thompson opened his notebook. I spoke to several students. No one knows Karen Johnson, but everyone knows Karen Miller. Robert remained silent, realizing that the trap was closing. Robert, your daughter was dating Davis, wasn't she? A long silence. Finally, Robert nodded. Yes. And you found out about it? Yes. When? The day before yesterday. Thompson wrote down the answer. And how did you react to the news? I was upset, of course. Just upset? Robert realized that it was useless to lie any further. I was furious. Why? Because he infected her with HIV. Thompson looked up from his notebook. What? Karen is HIV positive. She got it from Davis. My God. Thompson put down his pen. Robert, you do realize that gives you a motive for murder? I didn't kill him. No? Then explain to me how a prisoner got into a locked basement. Explain why no one heard the noise of the shelves falling. Explain why you talked to him so often in the last few days. Robert was silent. Robert, I've known you for many years. You're a good man, a good father. But you killed Davis, didn't you? A long silence. Finally, Robert nodded. Yes. Why? Because he ruined my daughter's life. Because he hid his diagnosis from her. Because he was a coward and a selfish man. And you decided to take justice into your own hands? I decided to protect my daughter. Thompson sighed. Robert Miller, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Mark Davis. The arrest procedure was a blur. Rights, handcuffs, escort to the police station. Robert didn't resist or try to justify himself. He had done what he believed was right, and was prepared to take responsibility. In the holding cell, he thought about Karen. How would she react to the news? Would she forgive him? Would she understand that he did it for her? A few hours later, a lawyer arrived. Michael Harris, an old family friend. "Robert, what the hell happened?" Robert told him the whole story, from Karen's meeting with Davis to the murder in the basement. Harris listened, shaking his head. "This is bad, Robert. Very bad. First-degree murder, aggravating circumstances." "I know. We can try to work out a deal with the prosecution. Second-degree murder, manslaughter." "Michael, I don't want a deal." "What?" "I did what I had to do. I'm willing to take responsibility." The lawyer looked at him as if he were insane. "Robert, you're looking at life in prison. My daughter has an incurable disease. That's a life sentence too." That evening, Karen came to see Robert. When he saw her through the glass in the visiting room, his heart ached. His daughter was crying. "Dad, why? Why did you do it?" "Because I love you more than life itself. But now you're in prison. Now I'm going to lose you too. Karen, listen to me. Davis got what he deserved. He ruined your life and got away with it. That's not your decision. I'm your father. It's my duty to protect you." Karen shook her head. "That's not protection, Dad. That's revenge." "Maybe, but I don't regret it." The trial took place 3 months later. Robert refused to take a plea bargain and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The story received widespread publicity. A prison warden had killed an inmate who had infected his daughter with HIV. Public opinion was divided. Some considered Robert a hero who had defended his daughter's honor. Others considered him a murderer who had broken the law and abused his position. The sentence was harsh: 25 years in prison without the possibility of early release. Karen visited her father every week. Gradually, their relationship was restored. She finished college and began working as a counselor for people with HIV. She married an understanding man who accepted her diagnosis. Robert served his sentence in the same prison he once ran. It was ironic, but he did not regret what he had done. Mark Davis would never hurt anyone again. Justice prevailed, albeit at the cost of his own freedom.